Hey guys, we are back with another Mythological Monday. This week I decided instead of doing one long myth, we're going to do two shorter myths and really kind of dig into the meat. These two are ones that I know that you've at least heard of, or at least are somewhat familiar to you. The first one we're going to do is about Pandora and Pandora's box, which I know everybody has heard of at least vaguely in their experience. If you feel like you know a lot about Pandora, you don't want to hear about Pandora, maybe they're going to comment it up there or down there, depending on where you're seeing this. And I'll give you a time so you can skip it if you don't really feel like listening to Pandora's box. And after that, we're going to get into Daedalus and his more well-known son Icarus. And both of these myths, to me, really speak about humans' humility and how we relate to the idea of being humble and how we relate to our own pride and our own standing in the world. So without further ado, let's dig into Pandora. So Pandora comes into the story right around the time where humans finally get equal footing in this world. What I mean by that is Prometheus had just came down. He gave us fire. He gave us the ability to not need to sacrifice all of our food to the gods, and really allowed us to now be able to heat our homes and create communities and create farms and create a life where we're no longer needing to consistently ask the gods for pity or to try and sway them or try and appease them. We are no longer in a position where we need them. We can just appreciate them. And so Zeus, at this time in his story, sees this happen and gets really, really upset. He does what he does with Prometheus, which is another story. But for humanity itself, he sees that in his world, things are out of balance, things are too equal, and he needs to introduce something else into this mix that hadn't been there before. So he decides to craft Pandora. And by craft that, I mean she is one of the few things in Greek mythology, at least, that was created by a god rather than born into existence. He crafted her. I think it's really important to acknowledge that in this part of the story, or at least up until this point in the story, mankind had been men. Okay? There had been no female energies, no female present. It has just been men existing on this earth. So Zeus decides to create Pandora, which is going to be the female counterpart to men. I feel like, and especially in a lot of the different tellings of this myth and a lot of different versions of this myth, you can really, really see the patriarchal view of ancient Greece. You can really see the masculine dominated understanding of Greece, because this, in Zeus's mind, is going to be the downfall of men. Once he introduces this woman into the story, he knows that things are going to go bad. We'll get into that a little bit more. I'm not going to hit it too hard because that's not the point I'm trying to focus on. But I think it's really important to acknowledge that most of us coming from if not Greco-Roman lineage, we live in a very Greco-Roman society as far as our ideals and our even religious beliefs, and just a lot of our social norms come from an extended version of this mindset. And so this male-dominated idea isn't new. It's been around from thousands of years before Christ came into existence. This is part of our cultural mindset, and we're just now at a point where we're starting to see things finally start to shift and to turn back a different way. So all of that aside, Zeus creates Pandora. She is the most elegant, supple, most breathable creation of his. He's not a very gentle man, but he really put all of that into creating her. Um, she's something that he knows men cannot avoid. She's something that men are drawn to, that will grab their attention and sway their story. And before he puts her onto Earth, before he sends her on her way, he creates a box, and he asks all of his god and goddess like counterparts, siblings, to put a shadow aspect of themselves into this box. So we get things like wrath, envy, jealousy, sloth, depression, anxiety, perfectionism, all of these different plagues, and they place them inside this box. Plague, I want you to think of more as like a plague of your mind or of your heart, rather than a physical plague like you would see in like the biblical story of like Moses, where the plagues are rained down. This is more internal. This is more personal than those kind of plagues. So he puts all of these things in a box, and he gives them to Pandora. And before he actually sends her all the way down, he instills in her a very, very deep curiosity, an unsatiable uh, thirst for understanding things that she can never really understand because she's just a woman. But she'll be hungered and driven to try and understand these things, which is another very real stereotype. But like I said, that's not the point of this video. I'm just telling the story. So as she goes down there, woman descends onto Earth and unknowingly brings about with her the destruction of mankind. There is a lineage or a parallel in between this and the story of Adam and Eve, where Eve is the one to eat the apple. You can find that idea perpetuated in a lot of different teachings, where it is woman's ultimate fault that this happened. I'm trying to poke at this thing without going too into it because I don't want to offend anybody. But that idea is very real and it is very old. Okay. So she goes down there and she's carrying all of these different emotional, mental turmoils without even realizing it. And she goes and she lives her life. She moves in with this man who I can't, of course, remember his name. And she lives a very quiet life on top of this hill, enjoying what life in Earth has to offer. But every night as she falls asleep, this box whispers to her. It says, "Open me, understand me, look to me, understand me, hold me, feel me, get to know me," which I think we can all relate to in our own journeys, where anxiety or depression or envy or wrath or any of these ideas don't start loud. They don't start full on. They don't let you know what they are right away. They just slowly creep into your head and into your heart until it's a full-blown mess going on inside of you. There's another very strong biblical parallel right there. It's all about the quiet temptations until you're dealing with all of it. I think there's also something to say about the feminine energy and how stereotypically they by they I mean like a woman or a more feminine individual usually understands those kind of emotions a little bit deeper. Because if we skip to the point that we all know is coming, if we skip to the point where Pandora opens the box, all of these things spread out onto mankind in an instant. They say in that moment wars broke out, murders broke out, adultery broke out, all of these things that really disrupt the harmony of human life break out in this moment. And I just think it's very interesting to note that the feminine individual usually does take the time out of curiosity and pursuit to notice and to hold these kind of emotional things, to understand them a little bit better, even though at the end of it you can never really understand things like depression or things like wrath or things like jealousy. You can understand how you relate to them more than you can actually understand them. But let's flip back. So she opens this box. Hell breaks loose. Hell breaks loose on Earth, and she quickly shuts it. And I know a lot of people know this part of the story, but as she closes this box, there's one thing that managed to stay inside the box. She didn't open it long enough to let that out into the world. And that thing is hope. Hope is the one thing that can counteract all else that was plagued onto this planet. Hope is the one thing that can change your mindset, change your heart space into something that is not so brittle and fixated and hard, right? But I also, and this is my personal take on this, I think it's very important to understand that hope was also in this box with everything else, which attests to the idea that hope is naturally part of us, but it is all about how you use hope. Do you use hope in a way where you're blindly fixated and rigidly holding on to something, whether it's a relationship, a job, a mindset, or a religious or spiritual point, or monetary gain, any of these things? Do you hope for it so tightly that you can't see God's actual coaching to you? Where he might be saying, that's not the best for you. Maybe you don't need that. Maybe that will actually hurt you. Or are you so fixatedly hopeful that you do lead yourself into a demise, right? Or do you use hope as it can be used, where even though the world around you is telling you something is the way it is, hope can break you through that perception and you can pursue peace, tranquility, harmony, joy, all of these things that your current outside world might be telling you you're not worthy of or you can't have. So hope is a beautiful tool for humanity, but it's a very real question of how do you use hope? And I would challenge you to ask yourself that question. How do you use hope? Do you use it in a way that is selfish and self-promoting, as far as like promoting your version of what you think you should be doing or what the world owes you? Or do you use hope in a way that moves you through the tumultuous environment around you to get to a more solid spiritual or personal foundation? I think it's really important to ask yourself how you use hope, because once you find out how you use hope, you can ask, how can I use this in a more healthy way? How can I use this less as a clinging mechanism? And once you find out what you have hope in, you can really take that next step and ask yourself, what do I have faith in? What am I actually putting my faith, my energy, my time, my heart, my head into? What do I have faith in? And that is one of the most fundamentally huge understandings that you as an individual can come to, is what are you actually putting your faith into? What do you have faith in? And that is a really short, I guess, version of Pandora and really the content of what her story holds for us. And I know it's going to sound and feel like I'm really shifting gears here, but these all do pull together really, in my opinion, very nicely. And so I'm going to leave Pandora where she is. I'm going to leave that story and those teachings um, as they are, and I'm going to swing over to Daedalus real quick. Daedalus and his son Icarus, um, both are from Athens. Most people know Icarus, but Icarus really doesn't come in until the very end of Daedalus' story. So Daedalus is essentially a man so intelligent that he rivals the gods. Okay? He is, think of the architect, think of the engineer, think of now those, but think of like the first one that humans have seen. He is a person who he invented carpentry and all of the different tools and skill sets that are needed to really pursue that art and craft that art. He invented sails, he invented masts, he invented the ways that humans can ride the ocean and harness the wind. So he really brought to the world, or Athens, all of these things that the humans had only attributed to gods. They didn't really think that they were capable of doing. So naturally, maybe unnaturally, depending on how you look at it, he really, really starts to get a very big head. He knows that people can now skim across the seas and they can build these empires because of what he contributed to it. And he, in his own world, stops seeing himself as the man Daedalus and starts seeing himself as the god of carpentry, the god of ingenuity, the god of creativity. Even though he really wasn't warranted of that, he was just a person that was living in the very truest pursuit and expression of what his personhood came here to do. But he did take it to the next level. He took it to the next level where he sat and basked in this understanding of I am the god Daedalus. Hear me be. Here I am. Um, it gets to this point though where he's sitting on his high horse, and the only person that really kind of bugged him out, the only person that really made him nervous, was his nephew, uh, who started putting out these projects, started putting out these different things that he was making, and people were really responding to him. They were really enjoying and utilizing what his nephew was putting out into this world, and it made Daedalus so nervous that he actually goes out and kills his nephew, straight up slits his throat. Done. Uh, I feel like that's self-evident. I feel like that speaks for itself. But in case it doesn't, if your version and your pride in yourself is shaky to the point, or unsure to the point where if you see somebody else's success and you get nervous and you feel the need to cut them down, or to do something to do what the gods did earlier in the Pandora story, if you are so surely unsure of yourself, I think it's really important to take a self-reflection. If you see somebody else getting powerful and you feel threatened, where is your power really sitting? Where do you actually draw your power from? Because your true essence doesn't need to worry about somebody else being empowered. If anything, you should rejoice in that. But Daedalus killed his nephew. That's how his story goes. So he gets kicked out of Athens with his son Icarus. They both get exiled out. And you would think that that would be enough for him to be a little bit worried, but there was this island, Crete, that said, Daedalus, you're looking for a place to live, like, come on down. And so he gets welcomed in this new town where they still know his glory and his expressions, just craziness, and he gets welcomed like a god into this new land. And that's where he really lets himself like shine. He really goes above and beyond as far as like his nautical work and just the ways that humans transverse and walk across this planet. He really does put a lot of work into it and changes this island's lifestyle dramatically. So this is the part where we come to a weird little side story that is important. So on Crete, there is a king, and the king has a wife, and she is really, really in love with the king's bull, his cow. Like, really in love with this cow. This happened because Poseidon had saved Crete from going under the ocean. And he said, you know what? I didn't mind doing that, but just, like, sacrifice your cows to me, man. Like, make me feel good. Let me see how they matter to you. And so the king did, except for one. Except for the most beautiful cow he's ever seen. Kept that one for himself. And Poseidon was like, dude, I see what you did. You're not that sneaky. And you know what? If you love that cow so much, I'm going to make your wife want to fuck it. I'm gonna do it. I'm going to put this spell on her. And I'm going to make her want that bull. And so she does. So just like, what? So she wants to go out and to meet this bull. But the bull is having nothing about it. Every time she comes close to it, he's like, what are you, like, back up? Like, why are you so in my space? You know? So she's, like, actually, though, like, very, like, emotionally, like, hurt about this because she's living in this, like, infatuated paradox where she really, really wants this bull, but he's just not returning the favor. And so she's, like, so hurt about it. And then she has the idea, Daedalus will know how to fix this. And so she goes to Daedalus, she explains everything that's going on, and there comes this moment where I'm reminded of the quote from Jurassic Park where Ian Malcolm says, "You were so fixated on whether or not you could, you never really thought about if you should." And I think that's a very important inquiry as far as humans go. Are you doing this because you care about it? Or are you doing this because you know you can put your name on it? Do you care about your art? Do you care about your relationships? Do you care about your job? Or are you just doing those so at some day you can say you did it? So you have a story to tell, so you have a stamp you can put your name on this experience, or are you actually invested in it? Do you care about the outcome? Do you want to put that out into the world? Are you grateful for what you're creating for creating it, or are you grateful for creating it because you know people will be awed by the fact that you have it? And that's a very deep question here. Daedalus didn't give a shit about those questions. He didn't care. He's like, oh yeah, I got you, girl. I got you, girl. So he makes this thing, which is essentially a cow suit, where she can walk on all fours and she can live in this suit and be a cow. So she dons the suit and she goes out into the field, and it happens. It happens, and she gets pregnant. And so she ends up giving birth to the Minotaur, which is the body of a man, head of a bull. I know you guys know what that image is. And there's a whole lot of different stories we can talk about the Minotaur, but I'm going to put those on a side burner because I want to talk about Daedalus. So when she gives birth to this Minotaur, the king is absolutely flummoxed. Like, what the happened? What is this? And he's so upset because this Minotaur has a temper, like dangerous beast. He is one of the more like dangerous beasts in the whole Greek storytelling. So the king realizes that the only person that could have made this happen is Daedalus and his son Icarus, who's guilty by association. And so he goes to Daedalus and Icarus and he says, "You guys need to do something about this." He's like, "I don't give a shit what you do. I don't care how you do it, but you need to fix this because this atrocity, this terrible thing cannot exist on my island, cannot exist in Greece. It's too much." And so Daedalus starts to begin his work on the labyrinth, which has so many different symbologies through a lot of different religions, this idea of a labyrinth. But he starts to create a intricate labyrinth underneath the island of Crete, something that is unsolvable, something that is so creatively twisted that you could spend your whole life down there and never make your way out of this labyrinth. And they house the Minotaur down there. That's the plan. And while Daedalus is creating this labyrinth, while he's getting lost in his own wandering, while he's trying his best to remember his own turns and his own tricks and his own story, he really starts to get hit with the impact of what he's been doing and how he's been living his life. He really has a chance to reflect on these different turns that he has made and these different choices that he had created and how they ended up creating the situation where he himself can feel lost from time to time because his creations are not him. He wasn't in his creations at the end of all of this. They were just something he did. He really lost himself to his own pride. And I think that's really illustrated in this creation of this unsolvable labyrinth. How do I get out of my own mindset? How do I get out of my own pride? How do I get out of my own ego and just back out into the world as myself? So he finishes this labyrinth. They place the Minotaur inside. A little side thing that I think is pretty cool. The island of Crete itself actually lays on a subduction zone where like plates of the earth are intersecting. And so the island actually felt a lot of different earthquakes and tremorings and a lot of that, more than a lot of other islands of Greece. And they would say in the mythology that when the Minotaur would roar, when he would bellow from in this labyrinth, that the island itself would shake. So there's a lot of speculation and there's a lot of agreement that the Greeks told that part of the story to explain why this island shook so much, which I just think is like kind of a fun little another way to interpret mythology, where it's not just about like human stories, it's about the world itself and like why it does what it does. And the island of Crete shook so much because there was an angry minotaur underneath it rather than a subduction zone. Like, shit like that's fun. um Anywho, so after Daedalus and Icarus construct this labyrinth and they get out of it, the king actually banishes them. Um, Not only did they have to make this labyrinth, but now you get to spend the rest of your life up on top of our tallest tower by the sea. You're just going to spend the rest of your days up there because you really, really, really messed up with this one. You caused a genuine atrocity onto this planet. Um, so Daedalus and Icarus are up there, and while they're sitting up there, Daedalus has this moment where he's like, you know what? I know the way I carried myself really got us into a lot of trouble. I know that the way I thought I was greater than what I actually am really got us into a lot of trouble. That I thought I was untouchable. I thought I was immaculate. I thought I was a god, and it's ended me up here. He goes, but I know at the same time what I have to offer is valuable and can get us out of this situation. I know who I actually am without all the Glender, without all the eyes, without all the credence and the validation. I still am capable of creating something to move us out of this predicament. And so he's looking around his situation and he notices, being on top of this tall tower by the sea, that there's all of these different birds that come and nest on this tower. And so he goes around, and this is probably the part of the story you guys have heard. But he gathers all these feathers, and he starts using the feathers and the wax from his candles, and he makes two sets of these wings. He makes two sets of these wings, one for himself and one for his son Icarus. And so they don these wings, they get him on, they get him strapped, and he turns to his son and he says, you know what, Icarus, before we go out, I need to just let you know one thing that I learned. If you go too near the sea, the feathers will become dampened and you will fall. And if you go too near the sun, it'll be too hot and it will melt the wax and your wings will fall apart and you will fall. The only way to get out of this, the only way to move forward, is to stay right in the middle. Right in the middle, moderation. I want you to think of that. We all know those feelings of feeling so grand about ourselves, and then reality hits and you realize you're falling. You weren't really that high up. You weren't really all that. And we also know those feelings of when you believe too lowly of yourself, the dampness of that ocean starts to latch onto you and you start to sink and fall even lower. And that middle way, the middle path, moderation, everything down the middle is a teaching that is so integral to so many theologies from around the world that it is, in my opinion, a very universal human truth, that it is all about that middle way and acknowledging both the heavy and the light, in choosing to the best of your abilities to acknowledge, appreciate, and stay within the middle of all of these different forces. Daedalus said, don't go by the water, don't go by the sun. So they leave and they're flying, and this is like the first moment in human history where there is flight from a human being. People on the shorelines were looking up at them and saying, oh my god, the gods must be here, because those are the only things that can fly. Those are the only beings we've ever known to be able to fly. And Daedalus is sitting in this quiet pride of knowing that he got himself and his son out of this situation by just believing in himself without needing to expound or expand upon himself. Just believing, and he did it. He saved himself, he saved his son. His son, as a lot of us know, didn't sit with that. That wasn't the end of his mindset. He looked down and he saw the people praising. He saw the people in awe. He saw the people blowing their minds with what he was capable of doing, and he really felt this rush of pride and of importance in how he was the first person to do this, and he wanted to show off. He wanted to show his grandeur and what he could really, really do. And so he started flying higher and higher and higher and higher. And as we know how the story goes, he gets too close to the sun and it melts the wax. And he falls. He really, really falls all the way down. And there's not a really nice or poetic way to say that that fall is what killed him. It's what broke him. It's what literally ended his life, was this fall. And so Daedalus, though, he had already gone through this journey on his own, and he sees what it did to his son, and so he goes and he rests, he lands and he sits by the ocean and looks out at the spot where Icarus hit it, and that's where he spends most of the rest of his life, is in this sorrow, in this sad, heavy place of knowing that he himself had learned the lesson, but he wasn't able to perpetuate it or to continue it on in a way that saved his only son. There is a later story where Theseus goes back to fight the Minotaur and he gets Daedalus's help. But other than that, that is where Daedalus's story ends, is at that beach side, at that seaside. And I know that's kind of a downer, but I think it's really poignant that both of these stories show how you have everything in you to blow the world away. You have all of the capacity. You can change the world. You can create immaculate, miraculous things. And if you don't believe it, hold on to hope. Hold on to hope, but don't be poisoned by your pride. Don't be poisoned by your pride, and don't be delusioned by your hope. If you find that middle way where you can hold on to hope of God's plan for you, and you can hold on to hope of peace and tranquility and harmony, and you can know that you have the capacity to change the world without needing to prove it to anybody other than your own story, other than just knowing that you did it, other than knowing that you brought this into creation. You don't need the stamp, you don't need the eyes, you don't need anything. You can sit comfortably in who you are and what you're capable of. That's it, man. That's it. There's no sea there, there's no sun there. That's just the middle of both of those experiences, knowing that you have the hope to keep you floating and you have the humility to keep you flying. And I think that right now culturally we're learning that. We're learning that. We're learning how to balance those forces. So if these stories helped you out, or were even fun to listen to, I'm just glad to be able to share this time with you. It's been 32 minutes, so I'm very proud of you for sticking this out. I'm very grateful that you chose to stick this out. I'll be back next week, and if you thought about something, if you liked something, if you didn't like something, if you want to go into deeper something, let me know. If you have any Greek stories you would like to hear, or any Egyptian stories, Norse stories, biblical stories, Buddhist stories, any sort of deep truth that you would like to talk about, let me know. Until then, I love you guys. Thank you so much for sharing this time with me, and I will talk to you soon. All right? Have a good night.